You ever stop to think about how much we just go with the flow? We stop at red lights, we wear certain clothes to work, we even laugh at a joke just because everyone else is. But how far does that really go? Well, it turns out the situations we're in have this incredible, almost invisible power over us, and it can push us to do things we never thought we would. So let's dive into just how deep this social influence rabbit hole goes.
So let me just ask you, straight up, imagine you're in a lab and someone with a clipboard and a lab coat tells you to hurt another person, to physically harm them. Would you do it? And I bet your first reaction is, no way, absolutely not. I'm not that kind of person. But here's the uncomfortable truth, brought to us by one of the most famous experiments in history. There's a pretty good chance you're wrong. To really get why, we need to jump back to the early 1960s. We're going to look at one of social psychology's most famous and, honestly, most chilling experiments. This is Stanley Milgram's work on obedience, where he set out to find the absolute breaking point of our willingness to follow authority.
Now, this wasn't just some random academic question for Milgram. He was haunted by the trial of Adolf Eichmann, a high-ranking Nazi official. Eichmann's defense for his horrific crimes was simple and terrifying. He claimed he was just a cog in the machine, just following orders. So that raised a massive question. Are evil people the only ones who do evil things? Or could the average person be pushed to do them too?
So Milgram came up with this incredibly clever and deceptive setup. Volunteers showed up thinking they were part of a simple memory study. Through a rigged draw, the real participant always got the role of teacher. Their job was to read word pairs to a learner, who was secretly an actor, strapped into a chair in the next room. Every time the learner got an answer wrong, the teacher had to give him an electric shock. And with each wrong answer, the voltage went up. The whole time, the teacher had no idea the shocks were completely fake. And watching over the whole thing, a researcher in a white lab coat, the picture of authority. So you can imagine, as the fake screams of pain from the other room got louder, the participants started getting really uncomfortable. They'd hesitate, they'd question what was happening, and that's when the researcher would step in with a series of 4 commands or prods. It started off gentle, please continue, but it ramped up fast, all the way to a cold, direct order. You have no choice but to continue. The results were, honestly, they were horrifying, way beyond what even Milgram expected. About 2/3, 2 out of every 3 ordinary people went all the way. They followed orders and delivered the final, massive 450-volt shock, which was labeled XXX danger, severe shock. Just think about that. These were regular folks, just like you and me. And Milgram figured out the perfect storm for making people obey. The pressure was highest when the authority figure was right there in the room and seemed legit, a scientist from a place like Yale. It was also easier when the victim was far away, in another room where you couldn't see them. And here's a huge one. It was almost impossible to resist when you didn't see anyone else disobey. Okay, so what Milgram was studying was obedience. That's our response to a direct order from someone in charge. But that's just one piece of the puzzle. There's another, much more subtle force at play all the time: conformity. That's when we change what we do or what we think, not because someone told us to, but just to blend in with the group. And that raises a whole new question. What happens when the pressure isn't an order, but just the silent stare of everyone else around you? And that brings us to our next classic study, the Asch conformity experiment. A psychologist named Solomon Asch wanted to find out just how strong that pull to fit in really is. Strong enough to make you deny what you're seeing with your own 2 eyes? The setup here was genius in its simplicity. A volunteer would walk into a room with a bunch of other people, thinking they were all there for a vision test. The group was shown a line, and then they had to pick the line of the same length from a group of 3. Super easy, right? The answer was always obvious. But here was the twist. Everyone else in the room was an actor, and after a few rounds, they all started picking the same, clearly wrong answer. So there you are. Your eyes are telling you one thing, but the entire group is saying something else. What do? Well, get this. While most people stuck to their guns, Asch found that over a third of the time, the real participants caved. They gave an answer they knew was wrong just to not rock the boat. And this probably sounds super familiar, right? We're way more likely to conform when we're feeling a little insecure, when the group has at least 3 people, and when everyone else agrees. It's even stronger if we admire the group or feel like we're being watched. I mean, that's basically high school in a nutshell, isn't it? It all comes down to this deep-seated need we have to be liked and to feel like we belong. But it doesn't stop with just obedience and conformity. The moment we join a group, our behavior can start to shift in other ways, and sometimes for the worse.
You know that feeling in a group project when you look around and think, am I the only one actually working here? Well, there's a name for that. It's called social loafing. In one classic study, researchers found that people pulling on a rope in a game of tug-of-war pulled about 20% less hard when they thought they were part of a team. Why? Because you feel less accountable. Someone else will pick up the slack, right? Now, this next one is where things can get really dark. It's called de-individuation. That's when being in a big, anonymous crowd makes you lose your sense of self. It's this dangerous mix of being hyped up and feeling like nobody knows who you are, and it can make people do things they would never, ever dream of doing alone. This is the stuff that fuels riots, mob violence, and yeah, all the nasty anonymous trolling you see online. So what happens when you get a bunch of people who already kind of agree on something and put them in a room to talk about it? You might think they just reinforce their ideas, but it's more than that. Their beliefs actually get stronger, more extreme. That's group polarization. Talking with like-minded people tends to push the whole group's views further in the direction they were already leaning. And if you're looking for the world's biggest group polarization machine, well, you're looking at it right now. The internet. It's an incredible engine for this, connecting us into echo chambers that just amplify and magnify our shared beliefs. Now, that can be a great thing for social movements or fundraising, but it's also what carves out the deep divides we see in society today. And finally, there's groupthink. This is what happens when a group becomes so obsessed with everyone getting along that nobody dares to speak up with a different opinion. The desire for harmony actually crushes good decision-making. Keeping the peace becomes more important than being right. And this isn't just about office meetings going wrong. We're talking catastrophic failures on a global scale. Groupthink has been blamed for everything from the botched Bay of Pigs invasion to the Watergate cover-up, and even for the series of bad decisions that led to the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. When everyone in the room agrees, it might mean that no one is really thinking.
So, after all that, it's pretty easy to feel a little down on the whole humanity thing, right? It sounds like we're all just puppets pulled by these invisible social strings. But hold on, that's not the full picture. There's one more massive factor we haven't talked about.
And here's the thing to remember. Yes, social forces are incredibly strong. The pull of authority, the need to conform, it's all real. But it's not absolute. The power of individual choice is just as real and just as strong. Let's go all the way back to Milgram's experiment. We're always so shocked by the 2/3 who obeyed all the way to the end, but we forget to talk about the other 1/3. 1 out of every 3 people in that experiment eventually stood up to the man in the lab coat, took a stand, and said no. They refused to go on. Defiance is always an option. So being aware of all this is our greatest defense. Just understanding that these forces exist is the first step to being able to resist them when it really truly matters. And that leaves us with one last big question to think about. Now that you know how powerful the situation can be, when will you choose to follow the crowd? And when will you find the courage to lead?